The Iraqi Civil War is an ongoing armed conflict in the Middle East. In 2014, the Iraqi insurgency escalated into a civil war with the conquest of Fallujah and Mosul and major areas in northern Iraq by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. This has resulted in the forced resignation of the Prime Minister, Nouri al-Maliki, airstrikes by the United States, Iran, Syria, and at least a dozen other countries, the participation of Iranian troops and military aid provided to Iraq by Russia. 2014. In the course of their Anbar campaign, ISIL militants seized at least 70% of the Anbar province by June 2014, including the cities of Fallujah, Al-Qaim, Abu Ghraib and half of the provincial capital of Ramadi during the Anbar campaign. In early June 2014, following further large-scale offensives in Iraq, ISIL seized control of Mosul, the second most populous city in Iraq, the nearby town of Tal Afar and most of the surrounding Nineveh province. ISIL also captured parts of Kirkuk and Diyala provinces and Tikrit, the administrative center of the Salahuddin Governorate, with the ultimate goal of capturing Baghdad, the Iraqi capital. ISIS was believed to have only 2,000–3,000 fighters up until the Mosul campaign, but during that campaign, it became evident that this number was a gross underestimate. There were also reports that a number of Sunni groups in Iraq that were opposed to the predominantly Shia government had joined ISIS, thus bolstering the group's numbers. However, the Kurds, who are mostly Sunnis, in the northeast of Iraq, were unwilling to be drawn into the conflict, and there were clashes in the area between ISIL and the Kurdish Peshmerga. ISIL executed 1,700 Iraq soldiers who had surrendered in the fighting and released many images of mass executions via its Twitter feed and various websites. In late June, ISIS militants captured two key crossings in Anbar, a day after seizing the border crossing at Al-Qaim. According to analysts, capturing these crossings could aid ISIL in transporting weapons and equipment to different battlefields. 2 days later, the Syrian Air Force bombed ISIL positions in Iraq. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki stated, "There was no coordination involved, but we welcome this action. We welcome any Syrian strike against ISIS because this group targets both Iraq and Syria at this point." The Jerusalem Post reported that the Obama administration had requested $500 million from the U.S. Congress to use in the training and arming of moderate Syrian rebels fighting against the Syrian government, in order to counter the growing threat posed by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. On the 29th of June, ISIL announced the establishment of a new caliphate. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was appointed its caliph, and the group formally changed its name to the Islamic State. 4 days later, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed caliph of the new Islamic State, said that Muslims should unite to capture Rome in order to own the world. He called on Muslims the world over to unite behind him as their leader. On the 24th of July, ISIL blew up the mosque and tomb of the Prophet Yunus in Mosul, with no reported casualties. Residents in the area said that ISIS had erased a piece of Iraqi heritage. Jonah's tomb was also an important holy site in the Jewish heritage as well. A few days later, ISIL also blew up the Nabi Sheet shrine in Mosul. Sami al-Masudi, deputy head of the Shia Endowment Agency which oversees holy sites, confirmed the destruction and added that ISIS had taken artifacts from the shrine to an unknown location. In an August offensive, ISIL captured Sinjar and a number of other towns in the north of the country. Almost 200,000 civilians, mostly Yazidis, managed to flee from the fighting in Sinjar city. About 50,000 of them fled into the Sinjar mountains, where they were trapped without food, water or medical care, facing starvation and dehydration. They had been threatened with death if they refused conversion to Islam. A UN representative said that a humanitarian tragedy is unfolding in Sinjar. By the end of the month, ISIL massacred 5,000 Yazidi men, with killings running in the hundreds in different villages. In addition, during this latest offensive, the Islamic State advanced to within 30 kilometers of the Iraqi Kurdish capital of Erbil in northern Iraq. Prompted by the siege and killings of the Yazidis, on 7 August, President Obama authorized targeted airstrikes in Iraq against ISIL, along with airdrops of aid. The UK offered the US assistance with surveillance and refueling, and planned humanitarian airdrops to Iraqi refugees. The US asserted that the systematic destruction of the Yazidi people by the Islamic State was genocide. The Arab League also accused the Islamic State of committing crimes against humanity. On 13 August, U.S. airstrikes and Kurdish forces broke the ISIL siege of Mount Sinjar. Also, 5 days later, Kurdish Peshmerga ground troops, with the help of Iraqi special forces and the U.S. air campaign, overran ISIL militants and reclaimed the Mosul Dam. On 31 August, the United States, France, United Kingdom and Australia began humanitarian aid drops, like food, water and medical supplies, to help prevent a potential massacre against the Shia Turkmen minority in Amirli. The U.S. also carried out airstrikes on ISIS positions around and near Amirli. Iraqi officials stated that they had reached Amirli and broken the siege and that the military was fighting to clear the areas around the town. This is known to be the first major turning point against the ISIL in Iraq. In September, the United States sent an additional 250 U.S. troops to protect American personnel, while the first engagement of the British military against its targets took place when a British Panavia Tornado jet dropped a Paveway IV bomb on a heavy weapon position operated by ISIS in northwest Iraq at the end of the month. In addition, Australia offered 200 special forces to the Kurds and 600 Australian troops landed in the UAE. The following month, Australia authorized its special forces troops to go to Iraq as part of the anti-ISIS coalition that day, as well as authorizing airstrikes. Mid-October, ISIL forces captured the city of Hit, after the 300-strong Iraqi army garrison abandoned and set afire its local base and supplies, and about 180,000 civilians fled the area. Later that month, Operation Ashura is launched by Iraqi forces and Iranian-backed Shia militias, scoring a major victory in retaking the strategic town of Jurf al-Saka near Baghdad, and securing the way for millions of Shia pilgrims who were going to Karbala and Najaf on the day of Ashura. Kurdish forces, meanwhile, recaptured Zumar. On 21 October, ISIL seized terrain north of the Sinjar Mountains, thus cutting the area's escape route to Kurdish areas. The Yazidi militias then withdrew from there into the mountains, where the number of Yazidi civilian refugees was estimated at 2,000–7,000. The mountains had once again been partially besieged by ISIL. In mid-November, Iraqi forces retook control of most part of the strategic city, Bayji, from the Islamic State and breaks the siege of the nearby oil refinery. However, by the following month, ISIL recaptured Bayji and re-established the siege of the refinery. On 17 December, Peshmerga forces, backed by 50 US-led coalition airstrikes on ISIL positions, launched an offensive to liberate Sinjar and to break the partial ISIL siege of the Sinjar Mountains. In less than 2 days, the siege was broken. After ISIL forces retreated, Kurdish fighters were initially faced with clearing out mines around the area, but quickly opened a land corridor to those mountains, enabling Yazidis to be evacuated. The operation left 100 ISIL fighters dead. Late on 21 December, Syrian Kurdish YPG fighters south of the mountain range reached Peshmerga lines, thus linking their two fronts. The next day, the YPG broke through ISIL lines, thus opening a corridor from Syria to the town of Sinjar. By the evening, the Peshmerga took control of much of Sinjar. 2015. In late January, Iraqi forces recaptured the entire province of Diyala from the Islamic State. Also, beginning of the Mosul offensive, in which Peshmerga forces captured large amount of territory surrounding Mosul. On the 2nd of March, Second Battle of Tikrit began, and after more than a month of hard fighting, government troops and pro-Iranian Shiite militias overcame ISIL fighters and took Tikrit. This success was offset in late May by ISIL's capture of the provincial capital of Ramadi in Anbar province. On 17 July, a suicide bomber detonated a car bomb in a crowded marketplace in the city of Khan Barnisa during Eid al-Fitr celebrations, killing 120 to 130 people, and injuring 130 more. 20 more people were reported missing since the bombing. On 13 August, a suicide bomber detonated a truck bomb in a crowded marketplace in Sadr city, Baghdad, killing at least 75 people, and injuring 212 more. On 27 August, a suicide bomber assassinated General Abdulrahman Abu Raghif, deputy commander of operations in the province of Anbar, and Brigadier Safin Abdul Majid, a divisional commander. ISIL forces lost Sinjar on November 13 to Kurdish forces. On December 16-17, ISIL forces mounted a major offensive northeast of Mosul against Kurdish position but were repelled. Starting December 22, the Iraqi army began a campaign to recapture Ramadi. On December 28, Iraq declared Ramadi liberated from ISIL forces and under the control of the Iraqi government. Belligerents. Both the Iraqi armed forces and the Kurdish Peshmerga are facing the Islamic State of Iraq in the Levant. Although some 35,000 Kurdish Peshmerga are incorporated into the Iraqi armed forces, most Peshmerga forces are operating under the command of the President of Iraqi Kurdistan in the Kurdish Autonomous Region of Iraq.